At the end of the service, we've got a whole ton of ice cream, pre-packaged, don't worry. And we've even got vegan ice cream for you vegans there, and it's wonderful. So please do stick around, have some ice cream, get to know Kirsty and Dan a little bit, and some of the other wonderful people that are surrounding you. Our speaker this evening goes by the name of Carys. She is an incredible human being. She not only is a mother to the wonderful Sailor, she's not only a wife to the wonderful Tim, but she also is an entrepreneur, and she is also you do something around hearts, right? Cardiac physiologist. There we go. So let's give a round of applause to Carys as she unpacks the Bible with us.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm super honored to be here tonight, to be speaking to you all. I'm finishing the series today on the Holy Spirit, and we're going to be talking about how the Holy Spirit equips. And I don't know if Ben has that slide. If he doesn't, it's fine. Okay. This just made me laugh because if you've been walking with God for any amount of time, you maybe will be able to relate. This is sometimes how walking with God feels, at least in my experience. I find it scarily relatable, to be honest. So yeah, I thought that was just funny to start off with, but just a little bit of background of me, really. So I grew up in a Christian family. My parents loved Jesus, my grandparents loved Jesus. I had an amazing upbringing. I saw what it looked like to have a daily relationship with Jesus modeled to me from a very young age. Looking back now, I can see that I did actually encounter the Holy Spirit at a very young age. I didn't really have language for what that meant at the time, but I would say throughout my life, I knew what it meant to have a personal, ongoing relationship with Jesus, and I'm really thankful for that. But when it came to the Holy Spirit and being led by the Holy Spirit, I didn't really have a grid for what that meant. The Holy Spirit felt very mystical and obscure and didn't really fit into my boxes of religion and God, and so I didn't really think about it very often, to be honest. And when I did hear it used as I kind of grew up through church, in my head it kind of felt very much related to leadership context, to people speaking on stage or doing ministry or that kind of thing. And I didn't really see how being led and used by the Holy Spirit day to day impacted my life. And for whatever reason, for many reasons, as I did grow up and kind of came into adulthood and moved away and started kind of doing bits and bobs of church leadership, I kind of found this thing that it just became quite a performance-based thing for me. And it's not to say that anyone told me that's how it was. It's just kind of this pattern that I fell into. I kind of fell into leadership positions, would maybe, get a pat on the back for doing something and be like, oh, well then I'll do that more, or maybe I wouldn't do something good enough, and I held myself to this really high standard, and I just constantly was striving to do things better and better and better. And not only that, I was trying to balance a career, I was newly married, I was trying to balance friendships and all of life on top of serving at church and leading at church and doing all these things. And to be honest, by the time I was only 24, I would say I was extremely burnt out from life, which is kind of not great, is it, at 24? I found that a lot of my life was spent striving to be good enough, and I held myself to a very, very high standard, and I honestly always seemed to fall short. And so when that came to the rest of my life, it really affected how I saw faith and Christianity. I felt like church and God was always this battle that I was striving to be good enough, and I just never met the mark. Again, no one made me feel that way. That was just the way I had experienced it. And over time, what I found is I actually began to want to pull away from being used by God. I didn't want to have responsibility in the church. I just found it absolutely exhausting and draining. I kind of had seen other people who had really given their lives to church ministry, had maybe at times ended up feeling a similar way, and thought, this just feels, to be honest, completely exhausting. And I don't know if this is really for me. So I began to pull back, just kind of focused on my career, and was like, I just want to have a nice life where I have my relationship with Jesus. I have, my friends and my church, but other than that, I'm just happy. And then, ironically, in 2016, God called me and my husband Tim to go and spend 3 years at a ministry school in California called Bethel. And basically what that was is 3 years of being equipped to do church leadership, which is very ironic. And I wasn't particularly happy about the decision to go, I'll be honest. But I knew that's exactly what God had called us to do, and I wanted to be obedient. And it was 3 years, and in the first year, I just kind of went on autopilot, to be honest. I just saw all these amazing leaders just kind of doing the church thing, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just like crack on then. And it was amazing, and it was an amazing experience, and God is really, really kind. He still gave me so many experiences, but I finished that year completely exhausted. And by the time I came into my second year, I came to a point which I'd never been at this point in my relationship with God before, where I had to say, time out, like, I'm just done. Like, I'm done. Like, Jesus, I love you. I do. I know what it is to have that relationship with you, but this whole church, walking with you thing, Holy Spirit, like, it's just exhausting, and I'm exhausted. And what happened was I had to come to a place of surrender where I basically said, I recognize I've just been doing this. I've been running so hard and striving, and I actually don't know what it means to do this led by you, Holy Spirit. I just don't know. And either you need to come and show me how, or I just don't want to do this anymore. And it was quite a vulnerable place to be in, particularly as a ministry student who didn't really like to minister, didn't really want to pray for anyone, didn't really want to talk to anyone. If I'm being honest, I was kind of the worst student ever. Thankfully, I had very gracious leaders. But what happened from that point, it was a real pivotal moment in my relationship with God, because I learned what it meant to day by day depend on the Holy Spirit and say, this is what I need today, Holy Spirit. This is what I need personally. There was a lot going on in my personal life, so I needed comfort, I needed peace, I needed wisdom. But then in terms of things I had to do, pouring out to people, serving people, loving people, leading people, I was like, Holy Spirit, I don't know how to do that out of my own strength. You need to show me how. And he did. And over time, there was a trust built between me and the Holy Spirit that I knew that I could ask, and I knew that all I had to do was show up and be willing, and he would show up for me. In Acts 17:28, it says, in him we live and we move and we have our being. I don't know if anyone was here last week, but Alex talked about the Holy Spirit giving us new life, and this life being for those around us, not just for ourselves. Being used by the Holy Spirit is actually within our nature. We're created by God, and experience the works of the Holy Spirit in and through us does not happen by striving or effort. It happens by allowing him to work through us. In Romans 8, it talks about our old life and our old mindset before we knew Christ, being as those who live according to the flesh and have their minds on what the flesh desires, versus the new mindset that Christ gives us. When we become completely adopted and fully accepted into the family of God, when we receive Christ, we receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, and Paul talks about us receiving this renewed mind, this mind of Christ. And this mind is not something that is just done and dusted. It's something that we choose daily. We choose daily to renew our minds, to ask for the Holy Spirit to do that with us. And what it means, it says in Romans 8:6, that we know we're operating out of this mind of Christ when we experience life and peace in our life. So I know that if I'm facing a challenging situation and I'm filled with anxiety, then most likely I'm not seeing the situation from the Holy Spirit's point of view. In that moment, I have an opportunity to ask the Holy Spirit, would you come and let me see the way you see? And then in my experience, that's where the peace comes, and I know, okay, I'm seeing it from the Holy Spirit's point of view. I don't know about you, all that does sound amazing, but that isn't often my day-to-day experience. It's still definitely a journey for me. I'd love to say that I've cracked it, that I've got it sorted. And whether or not you felt burnt out and tired before COVID, I'm sure we can all relate to that feeling now. It's been an incredibly tough year for many of us. As a nation and as individuals, it feels like everyone is living on survival mode and is just trying to get through. The word overwhelmed feels like it's on everyone's lips, including my own. I'm sure I say it about 5 times every day. I'm just so overwhelmed. And I'll be the first to admit it's very, very easy in this season to become very self-absorbed. We've been isolated from the world. We're focused on our own stuff. And it's easy to feel that way, just to look at what's going on in yourself. And I felt even it challenging to be like, do I have a capacity to be a good friend? Do I have capacity to be selfless and serve others? Like, I don't know if I do, if I'm being brutally honest. And I don't know if anyone can relate to that. Maybe you're all perfect and selfless and it's just me. Or maybe you feel like you have been running on empty for a while. Maybe you feel like you've been waiting for lockdown to end, for COVID to go away, for some kind of life situation to change before you can start either being used by the Holy Spirit or pouring out into others or doing that thing that you really wanted to do, but you just haven't had capacity. Maybe you've even felt distant from God in this season, like you don't even know how to get close to him anymore. And maybe you've experienced sickness or death or loss or grief, and you feel like you just don't even know how to bring that to God anymore. In this season, like for many of us, it's been a challenging season for me and my family. And one of the verses that God gave me about 6 months ago, which has really been an anchor point for me, and it's gotten me through a lot of difficult days, is Romans 8:28, which says, "In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. When we do not know what we ought to pray for, the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God." And I just love that first line where it says, "In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness." And what I found interesting when I was looking into it is that weakness can actually be translated to mean multiple things. So to me, my initial thought was physical strength or sickness, which it does indeed mean that, but it can also mean weakness of the soul. So it can mean want of strength, lacking capacity even. It can mean lacking capacity to do great and glorious things. Maybe, before this season you felt inspired, or you had dreams or goals and you felt like there was momentum and you were so excited. Maybe you had university to go to, new experiences, and you were so excited about that. But now you just feel a bit drained, like you don't know how to move forward, and you're just trying to get through the day to day. Maybe you feel like you're lacking capacity to restrain corrupt desires. Maybe there's things you've struggled with in the past that have been long gone and you felt like you'd overcome them, but those things are kind of coming back again and you're feeling discouraged. It can also mean lack of capacity to bear trials and troubles. We all face trials and troubles throughout our whole life. COVID is not the only time in this season that we've been through this. But maybe your faith just feels like it's hit rock bottom and you almost don't really know how this time you'll make it through. Maybe you're in this place, maybe you can relate to anything I'm saying, maybe not, and that's okay, but maybe your church experience, maybe your faith, maybe your relationship with God, or maybe just in everyday life, you're just feeling a bit exhausted and lacking capacity. We've been talking about the Holy Spirit for the last 6 weeks. We've been talking about healing and unity and the Holy Spirit bringing comfort, and maybe all those things have sounded really lovely to you and really nice, and you hear it and you're like, that sounds great. But you just feel exhausted and you almost don't know how to get from where you feel you are to that place. And in Isaiah 40:29-31, it says, "He gives strength to the weary and he increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary, and they will walk and not faint." The good news is that we have the Holy Spirit, and for this very reason I've stated above is why we need him more than ever to be equipped and empowered by him. The truth is that living a life led by the Holy Spirit and being used by him is actually easy, because it's him who empowers us and it actually has very little to do with us. Jesus never said that when we accept him into our lives and live a life following him that it would be easy. In fact, quite the opposite. He told us to expect trials and tribulation, but he equally didn't invite us into a life with him, drop us in it, expect us to strive and work through until we get to heaven and get all our rewards. He also didn't instruct us to go out to feed the hungry, heal the sick, love our neighbors, and serve our city without first empowering us to do so. When I was at Bethel at ministry school, one of the things the church was known for was this healing rooms ministry that they ran. And basically what it is that every week they'd open the doors and people would come from all over the world to come and get prayer for healing. It was an amazing experience. I did it all 3 years, and I saw things that I'll just remember for the rest of my life. But it was a lot of pressure. People would literally travel across the world, sometimes even for just a weekend. They'd use their life savings. A lot of people that would come were terminally ill. They'd used up every other option, and this was it. And you'd turn up, and you would be the person that prayed for you, and you'd be like, oh gosh, like it's hard not to take on that responsibility. And as you can imagine from the story I've shared, that was definitely something I had to battle with. And I remember when I was in my second year and I was kind of walking with the Holy Spirit through this journey, and I turned up one morning and I just said to God, I just don't know how to do this. I don't know how to carry. It feels like a burden. It feels like it's about me. And I know that it's not about me, but that's how it feels. And I'm worried about not doing the right thing or, letting people down. And I expressed some of these thoughts to the leader who I'd got paired with that day, and we would pray in teams, and then we'd have a guest, and the team would pray. And this leader was absolutely amazing, and she just said, Carys, I do not need you to do anything. God does not need you to touch these people. He chooses to use you because he loves you. And she said, what I want you to do is I don't want you to pray for anyone, and I want you just to focus on receiving the love of God. I want you to focus on just knowing that you're enough, that you're worthy, that you're chosen, and that God just wants to use you anyway. Which was terrifying to me. And that day, none of our team members prayed for a single person. We'd have the guests come up, and there was worship music playing always in the background, and we just focused on experiencing the love of God, and we invited the guests into that place to experience the Holy Spirit for themselves. And we saw more healing that day than I saw at my whole time at Bethel. Some of the greatest testimonies I ever saw came out of that morning. And to me, that was just such a reflection of the kindness of God, the reminder that it isn't really about me and my own strength, that he wants to empower and use us. That is his desire. And so often, I think the reason we end up with Christianity fatigue or just life fatigue is because so often we make it about us. It's really, really easy to do. We try and we struggle through, and if we feel like we're doing a bad job, then we might believe that we're not good enough to be used by God, or even we might believe that we're not fully loved by him because of it. But we forget that we have the source of life within us. And he wants to get out. He's going to get out either way. Your worth and your ability to be used by God for the Holy Spirit to empower you is not dependent on your past. It's not dependent on your theological training, your successes or your failures or your Christian accolades. It's dependent entirely on his grace, on his love, his strength, and his goodness. But the reality is that for many of us, myself included, we continually need the Holy Spirit to come and renew our minds and remind us of this daily, if not multiple times a day. We so easily fall back into control or striving, and we forget that we can actually trust the Holy Spirit with all of our lives. We can trust him to lead us, to empower us, to equip us, and guide us with everything we need to get through every day and every circumstance. And this doesn't mean that it's always easy. That's kind of why I showed that slide at the beginning, because it kind of sometimes can feel a bit like that. At least that does for me sometimes. That's the control freak in me. But taking risk and being obedient But what we find is when we do those things and we trust him, we learn that he is faithful. He is faithful to show up. He's faithful to come through. And I do believe that as we start to truly understand this, what it means to be led by the Holy Spirit, to receive the love of God, to know that we're enough just as we are without all the striving and the trying to do things right, that we receive this love of the Holy Spirit, and then it starts to just impact those around us naturally, because like I said, it's actually within our very nature to be used by God, and I believe people around us do notice. So as I wrap up this evening, I just want to just do something really practical. I don't know if, Alex, you want to do a bit of strumming. When I was praying last week, when I was preparing for this talk, I really had no idea what I was going to say. And I asked the Holy Spirit what he wanted to say to you. And he gave me a picture. Sometimes God speaks in pictures, and I just kind of see it in my mind's eye. And I saw this big river. And in the river, there was someone who was kind of just floating down the river very, very peacefully. And I was watching kind of third person. And I was thinking, oh gosh, wow, that looks so peaceful. And then I saw this big boulder, like right in the middle of the river. And then I started to get stressed because this person was going downstream backwards, so they couldn't see where they were going. And I was like, oh no, I know, someone needs to tell them, like they're going to crash into this boulder. And then the current just smoothly, at the last minute, glided this person out the way. And then there was kind of a turbulent point in the river. And again, I thought, oh no, they're going to get hurt. This is not going to end well. And it was like the current of the river just glided this person through it. And it wasn't that they didn't feel that there was a change. It's just that they made it safely through. And then as God continued to speak to me about this, I was thinking, okay, well, that's lovely. I'd love to have that experience. That would be really, really nice. I saw people at different points in the river then. I saw lots of different people. I saw some people who were in the river, in the middle, in the deep end, and they could feel the current. They could feel that pull of the Holy Spirit saying, you know, trust me, just take the feet up, just let go of the thing that you're holding on to. But they were kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to. And to be quite honest, that's where I related. I was like, yep, that's me. And then there were people who were kind of in a shallower bit. They were kind of halfway in, and they were watching, and they were like, yeah, like I'm kind of there, but not really sure. And then there were people who were on the shallow end, or even not in at all, and they were kind of considering, oh, do I want to step in? I'm not really sure. And this is kind of what I felt like God was wanting to say today, is that every single person here has a different journey, has a different experience of God and the Holy Spirit. We're all in different places. Maybe at times in your life you've been in the deep end and now you feel like you're back at the shallow end. We've all been at different stages, and that's really, really okay. And what I just felt like the Holy Spirit wanted to do today is just come and meet you wherever you're at. Wherever you are at on your journey with the Holy Spirit and with God today, is just to be like, okay, so maybe I feel like I'm at the shallow end. And what the Holy Spirit is asking is just that next step. He's not asking you to dive on into the deep end. He's just asking for the next step, to trust him with what's next. And so what I'd love you to do, as Alex is just playing, we're just going to spend a few minutes just waiting on the Holy Spirit, because I do believe that the Holy Spirit